What did you take away from this news conference, well, in terms of whether there was actually any news in it?
Well, I think the closest thing to news is the president's very strong statement about vetoing congressional Iran's sanctions measure. The president and the administration have made it clear all along they don't welcome a new round of sanctions coming from Congress because they like the track the negotiations are on. Vice President Biden, John Kerry, and the president all have said repeatedly they'll walk away from a bad deal with the Iranians, but that they want to be in control of this process. Beyond that, I think the news, such as it is despite some private disagreements about how to deal with cyber terror threats, the president has a very strong ally in Prime Minister Cameron in a time when his relationships, as has been the case for a lot of his administration, with other foreign leaders are not nearly as personally or professionally close. Not a lot of daylight between those two guys on how to deal with threats around the world.
Mark, it was interesting. Yeah, I think you're right. Certainly that the only thing that comes close to news is the statement on the veto, confirming what he said or has suggested previously that there would be a veto if the Congress tried to move a sanctions bill. He was, as you said, very forceful, saying that his message to Congress was hold your fire. He also said again, for not the first time, that he thought the prospects of a deal were less than 50-50. I'm curious as to whether, in terms of pure analysis, whether you think that there would ever be a moment where the president would ever say anything other than that the prospects of a deal were less than 50-50, even if he believed that the prospects were actually higher.
Privately, there are administration officials at the top levels of the government who are more pessimistic than that and have been for a while. But they don't see any other choice but then to try to strike the deal as long as the Iranians and the other parties to the talks from Europe will stay at the table. But the administration is a tough issue. You get mixed signals on a regular basis from Iran about what their posture is towards the negotiations. But the president is playing the strongest hand he can in a tough situation, which is to try to keep Congress from setting the talks back, play the talks out. But as I said privately, I don't think people at the top level of the government think it's like 50-50. They think it's substantially lower, but there's no alternative than to try to make it work and call the bluff of the Iranians and keep the thing moving.
Mark, I want to go to Margaret Talev, who's in our Washington bureau. Margaret, you cover the White House down there, and you cover it pretty carefully. It was pretty clear today that if there was anything the White House wanted to make news on, it was on the thing Mark and I have just been discussing in terms of that veto threat. Did you have any sense that going into this that was the thing that they were trying to, that was the one thing they wanted the takeaway to be from this news conference?
Right. Absolutely. Their main goal is to present this unified front on security, whether it's talking about Iran specifically, about how they're going to deal with ISIS. They both have sort of different constituencies in mind. President Obama is up against it with the Republicans in Congress. Prime Minister Cameron is facing re-election and wants to be able to show that he still has sort of command on the world stage. And so some mutual advantage in standing close together. But the message on Iran was very clear and unmistakable to the U.S. Congress: back off.
Margaret, did you see anything else in that stuck out at you in terms of this, in this news conference? Anything else that struck you as either new or noteworthy?
Well, on the political front, domestically for both of them, they put on the show regularly where they sort of tease each other about whose language is the real English and, you know, how the British tried to prevent the U.S. from becoming independent. But in the end, they always circle back to this narrative about what close buddies they are. President Obama touched on the sort of bro not controversy, but the fun with the word bro that they've had in recent news. And I think for both of them, they think that helps their audiences back home. But in terms of real policy messaging to the world, it was very much about the shared approach toward Iran and ISIS.
Okay, thanks, Margaret. I want to go to Phil Mattingly at the White House. Phil, the one thing I know about you, in addition to being an expert on American politics, you're a big expert on British politics, Anglophile par excellence. David Cameron, as has been pointed out by Margaret and others, he's facing an election coming up in May. Were there things that you saw in terms of how Prime Minister Cameron behaved that looked to you like he was a guy who was in the midst who was under pressure in terms of his domestic politics, and places where you could detect that he was playing in a very clear way to constituencies back home?
I think when he talks about the economy, he absolutely is. But look, I think probably more importantly for him on the political sphere is what the president says about him. It actually repeats what Christine Lagarde, the managing director of the IMF, said yesterday about the economy, that the UK is doing something right, is moving forward, and along with the U.S. are two of really the only countries right now that are weathering a pretty difficult economic storm. You're basically cutting campaign ads off what the president is saying today, off what Christine Lagarde said yesterday. I think if you look at the president's approval rating in the UK, it's fairly high. It's certainly a lot higher than it is here. So every time the president compliments how the prime minister has done economically, how he's done on the security side of things, that's something that benefits him for 2015, and I think it's something that David Cameron absolutely is willing to take home with him after this meeting.
Yeah, we talked about this a little bit before, Phil, the notion that President Obama's two of his top advisors are on different sides in that British election. President Obama was pretty full-throated in his support for David Cameron here. Do you think David Axelrod right now is sitting in Chicago a little bit gnashing his teeth over that?
Maybe a little bummed out. I think he would have liked if the president would have tempered his willingness to compliment the prime minister a little bit. Look, I think there's no denying, and David Axelrod knows this as well as anybody, the two have a really good relationship. The two leaders get along very well, probably as good, if not better, than any relationship with a foreign leader in the world for the president right now. So I think that always shows through. Margaret mentioned the buddy-buddy thing, so you're always going to see that when these two are together.